My name is Jeff Clark and I'm the CX Strategy Officer here at Microchannel. I'd now like to introduce my special guest today. He's someone who's a former CTO and spent the last 17 years helping Australian organisations, both large and small, leveraging their data, marketing and analytics solutions, to drive their business growth. To me, he's better known as the guy who has more frequent flyer points than I have ever seen before. That's probably testament to the amount of work he's done flying around the country helping different organisations. But he's someone who is a true expert in the space and someone that clients love to work with. So with that, it's a warm welcome to Stuart Dewgood.
Thanks, Jeff. And just so you know, I'm a minnow in terms of frequent flyer points amongst my team. Yeah.
Well, I was pretty amazed anyway. So now, Stuart, I'm really looking forward to discussing this topic today. Before we really get going, why do you think it's an important topic?
I think these days everyone needs to be more effective with what they've got in terms of engaging customers and getting them on the right marketing journey. And what we tend to have is what we're addressing today is, I think, a common problem that lots of people have, in that they don't really have a full understanding across the journey and aren't able to tie the dots together. So I've seen a lot of interest in this topic.
Great. Well, we're going to get into the weeds with that topic in a minute. Just before we get into that, a few little housekeeping questions today. So if you have questions today, please put them in the GoToWebinar little question box, and these will be answered at the end. We've got plenty of time for that. We've got a fairly tight schedule for the main part of the presentation and demo, so we're going to move relatively quickly, but don't worry, the session will be recorded and the slides will be provided after this to you. It will be a little bit different. We're going to try to have more of a discussion style and, as I mentioned, a hands-on practical demo to show how we can really solve this problem today. So it won't be just a straight presentation. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do a quick overview about Microchannel if you're not familiar. Microchannel, we provide connected customer communication solutions, really, and really that covers everything from the solutions and channels that your customers interact with to operating systems, solutions, back-end, and logistics systems. And really, to have an effective operation in business today, solutions really need to talk to each other well to drive those efficiencies, but also drive those meaningful experiences. Now, Microchannel's been around for a little while now, 22 years with 1,400 plus clients, and we work with a whole range of different solution providers to deliver those outcomes that I discussed earlier. So for you guys, what are the three things that you should take away today? Well, it's our intention that really we want you to be able to really understand the issues. It's not just going to be purely thought leadership here. We want you to acknowledge and recognise how these issues relate to you. So hopefully that's the case. The second part is we're going to show you practically how you can overcome these issues. And thirdly, some what to do next options for you to help you take your organisation forward. So the agenda is really broken up into a few different sections. We're going to quickly just answer the question why this is a real problem for organisations and why it exists today. And then we're going to move into, as I said, a practical demo about how we can solve this issue today. And that's really around how we can work with data more effectively, how we can visualize those journeys and take insights from this and actually take action and make a difference. Now, before we get into that, the meat of the sandwich, I thought this quote was a great quote by Elon Musk when he relates to customer experience and overall results. And really, that feedback loop is what it's really all about. Specifically when we're talking also around customer experience, because those insights allow us to take proactive actions. So really what we're going to be talking about today is how you can get that effective feedback loop within your organisation to see what's happening with those customer journeys. So the first big question is, why is this a real problem for organisations? So Stuart, in your opinion, why do customers struggle to see their customer journey? Why is this an issue for business today?
I think the landscape's becoming more and more competitive on the basis of what the customer experience is, and it's really easy to lose a customer. Someone can just switch to another tab and away they're on someone else's site. It's a lot harder than walking out a store and getting a taxi to another one. It also is, it's people are expecting more. There are companies that do this really well, and the bar's been set a lot higher. And with the introduction of certain big American companies into the market, it's just going to continue to get set higher and higher.
Yeah, and are you surprised by some of these statistics on screen? I mean, $40 billion a year lost, or on average $720 per poor experience. And then on the upside, that there is, for companies doing customer experience well, there's less price manipulation or discounting required. And positive customer experiences drive revenue faster. Are you surprised by those?
Not really. I mean, we all put things in the scope of our own context, and from my context, I'm usually disappointed in most websites I come across in terms of the experience that they offer. And I regularly use something that might be marginally more expensive on the basis of it's easier to use, or it just makes life easier and more pleasant for me.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the past, I think, I just wanted to sort of touch on this point, but, customer experience has previously sort of been the domain of like the website manager or customer service manager. Today, it kind of really impacts much more than those two stakeholders. I mean, what are you seeing out there, Stuart, in terms of businesses in relation to who really owns this problem?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one because everyone owns it to some extent. Everyone's certainly impacted by it. So there's a lot of people who've got a stake in it. I am seeing the emergence of more defined roles of things like a CXO, because we need another acronym, or a chief digital officer, of people who are actually where the buck stops. But it can be a problem in that when no one explicitly owns it, you have to find the right person to take the leadership in this area. But I think that's getting a lot more focus these days.
And when we're looking at those numbers before, there's a material impact to businesses very quickly across the board. Just the CFO and the CEO, and in terms of all outcomes that people are there to try to deliver for the business.
Totally.
Okay, so the next big question is why we can't see our customers' journey. So I think we've all experienced, how we might be able to see parts of what is happening if you've ever worked in marketing or in analytics or IT, but it's very difficult to really see exactly what's kind of happening. And often, a lot of organizations make assumptions about what is happening and what the experience is. We might take some of the information that we've got, potentially like some web analytics data or so forth, to design a journey. So Stu, I'm interested in your thoughts here. Is there anything wrong with traditional journey mapping? And you can see an image here where we're mapping out a journey with post-it notes and different stages of the customer journey. Is there anything wrong with that?
Not as such, but it's only a smaller part of the picture. Like you said, there's a lot of assumptions that lead into it. So what you should be mapping is what you'd like people to do, but it's not necessarily, you shouldn't confuse it with what people are doing or are going to do. Because there's one thing that working in this space has taught me is you always see surprises in what people actually do. So we tend to, with journey mapping, there's a lot of assumption and guesswork that goes into it. And there's also often a lot of feedback back from what you observe post any changes into the assumptions you made.
Yeah, and I guess journey mapping is that sort of desired kind of state that we want customers to sort of follow through. And I kind of wanted to touch on this point around, customers are quite unpredictable, really. I mean, we all would like them to be predictable and follow the path that we design, but in reality, that doesn't really happen. And I'm using a bit of an analogy here, but, we really want our customers all to be lions, right? When a lion zones in on its prey, it doesn't stop to say, I'm going to start looking around for other options that might be a little bit easier. It makes a decision and it goes for it. And we'd love our customers just to do that, but they don't do that. They don't stop and look around. They go for it. Now, if you compare this to sort of like other animals like dogs, and I'm not suggesting customers are animals, wouldn't want to go there, Stuart, but if you compare...
I'm just glad that you clarified that the customer in this case isn't the bison or whatever animal that is.
Yeah, that's right. But however, you know, dogs are a really interesting sort of analogy because dogs get distracted very easily. And if you've ever gone walking with a pack of dogs and they see something of interest, they're here, they're there, they're jumping around. And you can have the most well-trained dog in the world, but they can still get distracted and play up from time to time. So
I've said the same thing about salespeople before too.
Right, fair enough. So customers are unpredictable, and that's the hard thing about trying to really see it, and hopefully, you know, we can solve this. Now, the other issue we haven't really touched on, which is the big issue, is data. Now, firstly, I'm interested, Stuart, what is dark data? And is it applicable when we start talking around customer journeys?
It totally is. So dark data can mean a number of things. In essence, it means something that you can't see and interact with. So it's lending the term from cosmology. It can be data that's not integrated. So as such is not useful. So part of the journey that you're not seeing. It can also be data that's too difficult to integrate, so unstructured rather than structured data, where you need to, first of all, extract meaning out of it, and you don't have a manner in which you can do that. So maybe things like call centre records of transactions or feedback forms people have filled in, where it's much harder traditionally to get the insight and learning from.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. And I think the other sort of piece of that is that, you know, when I think of data integration projects traditionally, going back a number of years, and I'm sure you've had a lot of experience in this space, you know, it's been, or it seems hard and complex and difficult projects, you know, and it might be that organisations lack access to certain data, and you mentioned a couple of areas there potentially, or there may be a lack of expertise around that as well. And I've seen a lot of organisations build data warehouses and data marts and data lakes on top of those to try to centralise data, to try to build meaning as well. And they've been massive projects for organisations. So Stu, what's the issue with all this data sitting in data warehouses and traditional data integration type projects?
Well, typically it's been seen as an IT project, and there's been a lot of bespoke development, which comes with it a high cost, both in planning, implementation and maintenance. There's also a great complexity into it, in that a lot of the work tends to be point to point. You know, and if you're doing something that's more bus based with a service bus, then, you know, they're never cheap projects. So when your data needs are simple, often it becomes a complex project to actually get it to work in the way that you want. So you end up with, and most organisations have, of silos of data sitting around that simply aren't being used, where they could provide real insight into what your customers are doing and how you should interact with them.
Yeah, and I think the other probably observation around that is really using the data that's available to improve the experience around the context. So it's really about timing of events.
Yeah, totally. And this is part of the big shift away from batch-based integration to real-time integration. So, you know, if I'm interacting, I don't want you to a day later get back to me with what I'm interested in. I want you to make the personalised recommendation or suggestion now. Because you've got it, you just need to make the data available to the tools in the right way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Stu, we've identified that it's been traditionally difficult. We all want to know really what's really changed here. Okay.
Well, a couple of things. The first big one is around cognitive computing. So you would have heard from IBM around Watson. We've been working in this space for a very long time, and we've made great strides in the last few years of taking what we've learned and moving it into the software that you use every day. So what do we mean by cognitive computing? This is where you've got machine learning software that understands things on a level that computers had difficult. So whether it's understanding natural language or sentiment or context around things. understanding, difficult and complex vocabularies and things like financial management or oncology or the like are easy for computers once they're taught in the right way. But understanding is one thing. The cognitive also has the aspect of reasoning to infer from it, to, from the understanding, determine the intent behind what you're doing, how you're trying to achieve it, and what the logical relationships are to be intelligent about it. So if I'm searching for something on a site, it's not showing me spurious results, it's showing me things that are relevant. And the last step, of course, because cognitive is in essence mimicking how people work, is that learning. And none of this makes sense without it being able, a system being able to continually learn and get feedback from where it's worked and where it hasn't worked. And this is the bit that technologists have found difficult over time, but is becoming much and much better in the way that learning is built into this kind of solution.
Yeah, so am I right in saying, when we're going back to that dark data point, that the cognitive systems like Watson can actually infer insights that we could never do because we just haven't had the capability? But not only that, they will form a view and a recommendation really for us to take forward. Is that what we're really talking about as well?
Yeah, totally. I mean, cognitive is the enabler that takes that part of the dark data that's unstructured and makes it accessible, makes it useful in terms of the interaction and the context, so that then you can engage in conversations that make sense rather than ones that are completely ignoring the interactions you've had previously. Yeah,
that makes sense. And there's some interesting stats here from a cognitive report, and you can see the URL there if you want to go and check it out, just around outcomes of cognitive systems. And when we start looking at this, an increase in personalised customer user experience, 49%. It looks like it's happening today.
Yeah, and I mean, just to give you an example, don't think cognitive computing is a big box somewhere in the cloud. That's not what it is. It's a set of little services that you can use in your own programs, or we've already incorporated into the standard offerings that we've got. So take something like real-time personalisation. In real-time personalisation, we've put cognitive in there to learn about which offers are working, what's being clicked through, what's being viewed, and to which audiences. So instead of you having to figure out what you should do, it'll suggest you should be showing this content to this group of customers at this time, and I predict that you'll get a click-through rate of X%. So it can make life a lot easier when you're looking at things like, any sort of software interaction. I'm sure we've had struggle. And the point of embedding cognitive into the everyday software is to take away those issues you have and just make the drudgery or the difficult tasks automated for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of work involved in trying to work out what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's doing it for you.
Yeah, don't worry that we're going to be taken over by computers just yet, Jeff.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm probably redundant anyway,
yep.
Stu. So
you have quoted Elon Musk earlier, though.
Yeah.
So he would tell us to be on guard. Yeah,
credible.
We should be on guard.
Oh, yes, that's right. He's got some interesting articles he's written about it too. So, okay, now the other big change here around data.
Yeah, well, we mentioned with dark data, it's getting content, getting ideas out of it. The other is actually accessing the data that you've got, and this is a big problem, as we said. One of the things that IBM has done with this is taken an approach of not the typical vendor approach of we are the masters of all and you must give all your data to us. Rather, we're enabling the right data to be in the right place at the right time. And to do that, we've got a thing called the Universal Behaviour Exchange, or UBX, because everything's an acronym. And what it does is lets you move marketing data to be in the right context it needs to be. So if I'm going to send out a new ad, I need the data on who already owns the product. So I'm not showing you something that you already own, which happens all too often, as we know. And this becomes easy in the context of UBX, where you can just drag and drop from one data source to publish it to whoever needs to subscribe to it. And it'll do the smart matching on things like this identity lines up with another identity on another platform. It's not storing, it's not a data management platform. It's just moving data to be in the right place at the right time.
So it sounds like it's moving event type data.
So not just all, you can either do events. So Jeff's seen some struggle on this site. Better tell my marketing system so we can send him an email about follow-up. But also, oh, that's an interesting audience or segment I've seen in my analytics. Better send that through to somewhere else for further information.
Sounds good. And in terms of those endpoints, in terms of the data ecosystem, you mentioned, you know, not owning all the data.
Yep.
What does that look like?
Well, the key point here is that the repeatability of these solutions. Because this is integration focusing on the marketing stack, IBMs and our partners are going out and doing the work for you. So when we talked about integration before, we said it can be expensive and a lot of bespoke development. We're taking that bit out of the equation by having pre-built pluggable solutions in there. So if you want to push stuff out to MediaMath or integrate with, you know, DoubleClick or Google or Adobe Analytics, or maybe you know, pull data in from SurveyMonkey or whatever else it might be, or your CRM system, then we have pre-built integration, so you can just plug and play between them. Publish data from one point, subscribe to it on other points.
Cool. And then the final piece, which we're going to jump in and demo shortly, is customer experience analytics.
Yeah, so this is an area where I've been kept very, very busy lately. What we've done is step back a bit from web analytics, because web analytics is great. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we're thinking we can get a larger picture. Web analytics is great at giving you, yep, my marketing's working in that people are coming to the site and they're going through my funnel, but where they're dropping off, you're not really getting a lot of insight why, and there can be a lot of custom coding and reporting issues there. With customer experience analytics, we've augmented that idea of just looking at web analytics, which in the IBM world is digital analytics. So we have that, but equally well, heading off the question I'm sure you're going to ask, Jeff, we can work with Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics as well. And we've added in things like behavior analytics to help you answer the why. Why are people dropping off on this stage? Also known as tea leaf, this capability can detect struggle, and you can use it to optimize your online conversion rate. And there's a lot of different use cases. But this is a big enough topic that if I start talking on it, you'll never drag me away from the microphone. So how about we cover this in a later webinar? But the one today that's most relevant is around the journey analytics. So from a customer experience aspect, as we've said, it's not just the individual touch points, but it's the larger journey that we have been struggling to understand. So we've built a tool that can look at the interactions across the channels and give you an idea of that journey. And the way it's doing that is cleverly through just listening in to traffic that's going through UBX. So to hook data in so you can analyze the journey, you're also getting the added benefit of being able to move that data to the right place at the right time.
So we're really bringing in data from not only web analytics, but all other sources that you seem relevant.
Yeah, totally. And they can be not just digital channels, of course. These are your other channels. So your shop front, your call center, kiosks, whatever else it might be, where you've got an identifier of the person, you can bring the data in a way that helps you analyze the larger journey.
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of organizations who have their own customized bespoke data systems, which carry lots of different information as well. So they can bring that data in as well?
Yep, so if you've got, or integration you've already done, then we make it easy with UVX in doing a custom endpoint. It's not a difficult job at all to bring data in from your own custom source. So that means that you can then align that from an identity matching perspective, and you see that data in the scope of the larger journey for the analytics.
Great. Well, let's have a look at it, Stu.
All right. This is where Jeff switches over and passes the keyboard to me, so it's dangerous. So
all done.
All done. Hopefully, look, we're actually seeing here. What we're seeing here is a dashboard, so the opening dashboard from Watson Customer Experience Analytics, and it gives you a cross-channel view and an overview of things like revenue and retention and abandonment. It's a little compressed here with a smaller screen resolution for the webinar, but it'll do the job. You've got different views here of things like focused on one particular channel. So if you wanted to look on the web and, look, it's logged me out. Jeff's been too long in there. No, we're back again. That was quick. Gee, you've got great Ethernet connection here, Jeff.
Don't thank me.
You're not on the NBN then? Sorry, I haven't offended anyone. No. So you've got, focused on particular channels like web and mobile, and you've got some interesting new types of reports you can do because you've got multiple channel data coming in. One of these is around mindset analysis. So mindset analysis is showing us in this circle form of where your customers are at in the stages you want to push them through. So mindsets across the top here are things like discover, compare, acquire, use, and be an advocate. And what we can see is from this big sort of, I can never quite name that colour. It's
it's sort of like a teal.
Teal, that's it. Teal sounds good, yes. Yeah. Lucky I didn't go with puce there.
Yeah.
You've got a great big blob there, and that's in lightly active customers in the compare stage. So we've got a whole bunch of people who've done just a little bit of comparison action who we need to move across to the acquire. Okay. We've got a few people who've done a lot of comparison, but not very many, and we've got a good funnel of people in the other areas. What are these stages? Well, they're defined by actions that you'd incorporate in here. So things like, getting an email or clicking and opening it, or actually looking at products, or starting to put something in the cart but not purchasing, or having an interaction with particular form fields that didn't work. For any of these interactions, you can drill into them and see things like, okay, it's a product view, but which products were being viewed and what's the trending there? And you can look at them also as well and say, okay, for these product views, what were the paths that got people here? And that's a nice throw actually across to the other type of report. So this is telling us where people are at, but the journey report is telling us all about how they got there and where they're going. So if I, I'll jump into it. I jumped into an entry report then, empty report then. Go into the journey report. So this is what happens when I do the demo run through on my machine, then log into Jeff's account. So we just expand out there a bit. So this is an example of a journey report. And what this report's looking at is for people who ended up doing a cart purchase, looking back over the last couple of weeks, how did they get there? What were the top 5 paths that they took? Now this could be from a starting point to an ending point, or just from a starting point over a time period, and you can do it just for particular segments as well. So you might look at, from an email campaign, where did people end up? Or how did people get to in-store purchases, right, when they started from a particular email or not?
So really what you're saying here is that, say we run a specific tactical campaign and I want to see the impact of that campaign, say if it was an email campaign, apart from opens and clicks.
Yeah, you can see how many people actually went to the web, how many interactions, did they end up going to the call center, did they end up going in store, which were the particular variants of the campaign that caused which particular behaviors so much. So any of these, you see the top 5 paths, right? They're ranked on things like the most traveled, or the revenue, or duration, or even the number of unique customers. And I can drill into those. So if this top one here, where we went web, email, back to web, and then ended up purchasing, it makes you think, okay, well, what happened on that email that caused people to come back to do the completion? So if we click on the email, we can see, okay, I've got a high proportion clicking and sending and opening. Which particular email was it that they opened? And I can trickly see that nature of that email. And when they went to the web, you can see what they were purchasing, how they came into the web, what products they were viewing. What was the grief they had in the first place that caused them perhaps to not progress first up? Was there something different in what they were viewing or how they got there? What products were in their cart abandonment? When they had struggle on the site, what was the struggle that they saw? What did they end up purchasing? And for any of these interactions that we're looking at, we can also save off the audience here, push it through UBX to our execution platform, whether it's IBM or not, to take some follow-up action. So if I've seen, hey, I've got a whole bunch of people here who I think would be great for this type of promotion, I can immediately not only have analytics, but actionable analytics, which is, you know, analytics isn't much good unless you take action from it.
Yeah.
The other thing you can do when you're looking at struggle events is you can drill straight in and replay the sessions to get an understanding of just what was the nature of the struggle that they had. That's part of the integration and the broader customer experience.
So what do you mean by replay? I mean, just to give an example so people can understand what that means.
In essence, what it means is if your customer came to the site and because they were on a particular Android device, then half the screen was cut off because someone had stuffed something up in the production in a new build, then you'll be able to see that when you replay and you'll understand, that's why they didn't get through, and maybe take action and send an email, hey, we had problems with our site, why don't you come back and have another look as a follow-up action to all the people who experienced that. So replay is giving you a visual click-through of what the person did on the site. Even if the error's gone away, you can see the problem that they experienced from the customer's perspective.
Now, I've heard this described as sort of having a GoPro sitting on the customer's shoulder, so you can kind of see what every customer is doing. So if you want to drill down, you can actually see how they behaved and where they struggled and where it worked well. Is that a good analogy?
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. Yeah, it's giving you that insight to help answer why people are coming to grief rather than, yep, they are coming to grief here. So we've seen problems that have been sitting around for 18 months that have been unable to be solved. Like with a big Australian customer, well-known brand, solved it in an hour and a half on TLIF with this capability.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm, you know, when I sort of look at this, you really can drill down to say, okay, well, we can see that something's happening here with this email. It's either working or it's not. Compared to other campaigns, you could probably then say, well, what was our content? You know, if that's working, we should use that content in other campaigns. Or if it's not working, what do we want to do? So I'm sort of looking at this when you've shown the mindsets, and there's a big bubble there, and people are kind of stuck in that compare phase. Why are they stuck? Is that right?
That's exactly what you're trying to get. Yeah, analytics for analytics' sake is not much use. It's at the moment, tools people are relying on for this kind of stuff are stuck in just the digital world. So just, you know, digital channels, and they're not seeing the further offline channels, and they're stuck with a very old model of attribution understanding. So first click or last click, or balancing them over a particular time period.
And that's driven from web analytics.
From web analytics, yeah. Web analytics is sort of growing to bring in some of this other stuff, but it can't bring in all to get the true omni-channel experience. So, you know, with that kind of attribution 1.0, you know, you can say, yeah, look, you know, it seems as though this is what caused the success. But when you actually see it laid out as a path, it's usually quite different, right? You can take, you know, first click doesn't tell you much when the first click can lead through multiple different channels. And last click similarly doesn't give you the same picture either. So I actually like to think of this journey analytics as sort of attribution 2.0 in a lot of ways. It really goes above and beyond what has been traditionally done in this space to understand where marketing's been effective, where people are effective all by themselves, and gives you that true omni-channel capability of looking across things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of flaws around, as you say, some of those attribution models, but it's what we've had to work with, right? So, yeah. And I guess the other thing when I'm looking at this is around taking action, right? So analytics for analytics' sake, as you mentioned, is, you know, what's the point?
Yeah.
So do you have some examples, or an example, a tangible example of a customer seeing something and taking action and seeing a tangible outcome from this?
Yeah, I think we've seen really good tangible outcomes from the data integration side. So a reduced ad spend, 15-20%, from not showing ads to just through UVX integration, not showing ads to people who've seen them before. When it comes to the analytics, what we tend to, when we roll this out, be really surprised at virtually every customer at the kind of things that you see. Because like you said, the customers aren't the lions, they're the distracted doggies, right?
Yeah.
Is that the term?
Something like that.
Yeah, so people don't follow paths that really resemble the journey mapping at all. And you often see, like we had an example of people jumping in from one email campaign, positioning it on one area, and it ended up that actually the offer that was attractive was one that they hadn't expected at all, right? And the top paths that people were following was nowhere on their journey map at all. And what that meant is that they could then relaunch that campaign centered on the product space that was actually gaining traction, and the results just went through the roof as a result. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to get insight from this. Sometimes the action you take away is directly by taking an audience out and from the analytics. Sometimes it's indirect in terms of insight that leads you just to change the approach you're doing in the campaign.
Yeah, and I think we've all got a bias in terms of the campaigns and how we run campaigns and the content and what we think works, right? And we can rely on some data to support that, but
yeah, I mean, we're all driven by a familiarity bias in psychological terms, right?
Yes.
We think of what works for us will work for everyone, and time again, we've proven that's not the point. You know?
Yeah. Makes sense. It makes sense. So what are we looking at here, Stuart?
So this is just one last variation on the report I wanted to show, which was not only showing the channels, but showing where the mindset interactions were in the scope of the path. So as an example, with one customer, we saw that there was a lot of buying up front in the process, with on some customers further buying down the track. And it turned out that where they hadn't thought, they'd done a lead with some t-shirt, a cheap product for them that was just a side thing and not meant to be core, but it actually led to, with a further campaign, the larger sale down the track and the association.
And by sort of seeing where the mindset was of the customer through the campaigns, they could see that they were really in the.
What they saw after an initial web interaction, there was a purchase, which they weren't expecting. They were expecting it later in there. So that drilling into the acquire stage of their gave them some insight into adapting their campaign that made it really successful.
Yeah. And I quite like the way that you can look at, most traveled, but also the velocity, right? So, how customers can move through. What are the journeys that they're following which move the fastest and that generate the most revenue, and what's the timing around that? I mean, we're looking at that 5 minutes from mobile to web.
Yeah. So this is something that's often lost in traditional sort of attribution modeling and understanding of journeys, and is of course critical when you look at things like you want to do send time optimization on your emails. How well is it working, right? How is it driving behavior across the channels in the way that you want in a timely fashion? Should you be looking at optimizing for different times or different campaigns?
Based different audiences.
Yeah, exactly. It is one thing working for one audience and one not for another is one of the things we often see in here.
That makes sense. Thanks, Stu, for running us through that.
That's right.
That's great. So we're just going to do a couple of little wrap-ups now. It's just a very quick summary here of really what we're seeing. And as we talked about before, we're really only showing a summary of one piece, but really the takeaways that I've got are around bringing all your customer data together so you can actually do something with it, and then see issues and opportunities and be proactive about that, taking action, and getting a real insight around the attribution or the return of what's actually working for you and what's not, but also understanding why customers act the way they do. And in the context of all of this, and all this information is really about understanding the content, the campaigns, and working better and smarter continually to drive the outcomes.
Yep, sounds good to me, Jeff.
So a couple of case studies, because you mentioned a couple of examples, but I thought, look, you know, for any of you out here who want to sort of have a look at a specific case study, if you Google Airlines Revenue Corporation with IBM, you'll find this case study. But the interesting point here, which Michael makes, is that they can automatically map out customer journeys from beginning to end, even when people switch back and forth between channels.
Yeah, so these guys actually, if you do Google it, you'll find 2 case studies for them.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them is on the behaviour analytics, and one of them is on the later work they did on the journey. And that's actually an approach a lot of people do. They start with behaviour and move to journey. But with this one of the insights they found was that their marketing campaigns were sending people to areas where they didn't have the content that they were looking for on the basis of the campaign. So it was a real mismatch between the landing pages and the intent.
Yeah.
And that was just one of the little insights that helped them drive a lot of results out of this.
Yeah, and the other point that I like to note here is that, you know, Michael talks about it, you know, traditionally taking weeks and weeks of painstaking work to try to stitch together some sort of end-to-end journey. And as we talked about, there's assumptions that kind of have to be made there. But by using UBX, they could pull in data from, you know, all their digital channels, website, offline channels, CRM, etc., and actually see the journeys literally as they unfold, which is, I think, incredible.
And this customer is in an interesting position in that, you know, the vast majority of all air travel bookings in America go through their system. So they were able to get some great insights from that because they had some good data too.
Yeah, sounds good. So a lot of you might be asking, really, what's involved to get going? And you might be asking, do I have the data and so forth? So Stuart, can you give me a summary here around, you know, the steps? What would be involved here?
The typical way we approach this is, of course, with the low-hanging fruit. So the easy stuff to do is really bringing in your web analytics, like I said, whether it's from IBM's digital analytics or from Adobe or Google or the like. That gives you a large part of your digital interactions. Then you also want to hook in your marketing execution, so you can see your email, SMS, mobile push interactions. With the behavior things as well, if you hook in behaviors, you can do instrument native apps and get some good insight from them is a later approach you can look at. And of course, doing things like connecting in your shop front and your call center. So with CRM systems, there's out-of-the-box integrations for stuff like we just brought out one for Salesforce. We've got Sugar CRM and others in there. When you incorporate that data in as a later phase, then you start to see some really interesting journeys and things that are just, you know, require a team of data scientists and a data lake and I don't know, a data something else with a data whatever thrown in. Yeah. Yeah. So this is about,
sounds hard.
Yeah.
And also just in terms of like investment, because I know some of these technologies in the past were worth a lot of money. It cost a lot of money to implement. What's changed here, and what sort of investment would customers sort of expect?
I mean, this is a big change. It's a big change, particularly for IBM, who've been known to play in the enterprise space. We're very heavily moved, along with the cognitive push, is the cloud push, so SaaS-based services. And because, you know, the UBX is a SaaS-based service, the CXA, the customer experience analytics, is all SaaS-based service, then that brings the cost down dramatically. So you could be talking about, like, you know, as little as a 30K annual spend and 30, 50K setup to get this stuff, to get yourself going in this space.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's pretty easy to recoup that sort of return.
Yeah, it is. We can see an ROI within a matter of, I think the record's minutes, but usually within in weeks and months of, it's totally paid for itself.
Yeah.
None of this annual or 3-year return. It's a lot less than that.
And when you say minutes, that's specifically because what customers can see stuff that they had no visibility on before.
Yeah,
even though they thought they did.
Yeah, pretty much. We had one group where they were installing it, and the installer told them that their payment gateway was down, and they didn't even know about it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's going to hurt.
It is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, thanks for that. So just to try to wrap up here now, just a couple of points around taking action. So at the end of this presentation, you'll be emailed a copy of it, as I mentioned, recording, but we're also going to send you out a guide, the 5 best practices for understanding customer journeys. If you would like to have a consultant and just discuss how your data and how you work would work with something like CXA and so forth. There's a couple of options for you. At the end of the webinar, there's a little quick pop-up questionnaire thing. You can make a little note there, and I'll give you a call, or you've got my contact details there. And then finally, obviously, if you want to look at making a difference, hopefully we can help you to take that sort of step. Now with that, we'd like to move to some questions. So just see what we've got here. Okay. So what sort of application is there for CXA when a site doesn't have e-commerce?
That's a very good question.
It's a good question.
Generally, your biggest benefits from understanding where a site is driving revenue. Now, it doesn't have to be directly driving revenue. Often when a site doesn't have e-commerce, it's all about driving the transaction in a store. And it can be incredibly difficult to understand that.
Or a salesperson, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it can help in understanding that journey and the handoff, like where you've got that when a site doesn't have direct revenue, it becomes difficult to justify itself without better understanding of that journey. The other side is as well the behaviour. While you're not looking at checkout abandonment or quote abandonment, often when sites aren't transactionally focused, they have a complex information architecture, and the kind of analytical tools we've got around behaviour can help you understand where people are struggling on findability of content, both from a navigation and a search perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and I've worked in a world where we've worked on developing very complex nurture programs and so forth, and a lot of that's based on, again, what we think the content needs to be at that stage and what customers potentially need.
What we guess you mean. Yeah.
What we guess, exactly, right? It's sort of design, and then you sort of roll it out. So I think probably another way to think about that is every organisation has a sales process, whether it's to consumer or it's to other businesses and so forth, and CXA can actually provide insights to it because we all use digital channels. We have to today.
Yep.
Right, and I think that's the context.
Yeah.
There is an interesting question here about data not being in computers but in your brains. Okay, so that's it's a tough one.
So on the follow-up question there, if you might have missed the last step, if you're free to come in the office and Jeff will wire you up.
Yeah, that's right.
Either that or he'll give you a beer and that'll get the information out.
Right. Yeah. Well, at some point it's got to be. Data needs to be.
It does. It does.
So,
yes.
So you can't have it all in someone's head at some point.
No, you can't. But that is, that is a fair enough challenge in that you need to be capturing an identity at point of sale in order to do some of this matching. So. Well,
in this context, the question's around publishing, I guess. So, but there's a customer somewhere.
Yep.
As you say.
Yep.
And there's a customer record somewhere, or there's a way that you capture customer data somewhere.
This is right, yeah. And while you can do a lot with, get a lot of insight and understanding without necessarily capturing identity and the lot, it's when you do capture that identity that it leads to improving the bottom line.
Yeah. That makes sense. And also, look, it doesn't matter what you do, you're communicating with customers in some way, whether it's offline or online.
Yep.
And we're all using systems in some way, shape or form today.
Very much.
I think we've moved out of notebooks into the digital world. So I've got a little question also just specifically around Google. So, because a lot of customers use Google Analytics, okay? So is there any difference between pulling in data from a Google Analytics or an Adobe or the IBM Digital Analytics in terms of outcomes?
Generally, we can absolutely work with those other systems. We can, in essence, publish the data they're publishing also through UBX so that it's consumed and seen from an analytical perspective. And like you said, that's a very common scenario. The advantage if you've got IBM's digital analytics is that you don't have issues with storing private information like Google won't let you do. So you can take follow-up actions on people you identify.
So what do you mean by that in terms of what?
Well, if you needed to keep email addresses or other contact detail that you're not allowed to do in Google Analytics terms of service, then with digital analytics you can, when you identify and keep that identity, flow it through to things, so to whether it's remarketing or the like. You also can get a stronger view of how you're transacting because it's not sampling, right? So you can actually see all the transactions going through rather than inferring what they might be based upon a small sample size.
So Google does some sampling there around the data.
Yep. Yeah, and the other aspect is, of course, while we can help you in moving from a Google or an Adobe report to seeing the journey or seeing the replay and behaviour, it's more seamless from a DA perspective.
Right.
Yeah. So the reality is we work with them every day. Of course, there's some advantages to using our direct tools in there as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question here around the timing. So we covered some of the investment just in terms of how long it takes to do these sorts of projects. How quickly can you get up and running?
Because it's SaaS services, that makes it really quite quick. The hooking in of things like the web analytics is, a fiddling with the tagging that you've already got done process, so it can be quite quick. Bringing the marketing solutions, because they're plug and play out of a catalogue of pre-built solutions, that's not requiring integration work so much as it is configuration work. So again, you're talking in a matter of days rather than weeks and months. The thing, when you're talking about bringing in CRM data or point of sale data, that can take longer because there's more integration involved. If it's one that we've already built, that can be quite quick. The really fastest path to value is looking at behaviour. Right? That's the low-hanging fruit to do conversion rate optimization on the site. But that goes hand in hand with the other areas of CXO.
So that's sort of looking at the issues, the struggles.
Yep.
And identifying those points that, as I mentioned before, that most organisations don't think they have.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's not that they don't think they have. Everyone's got a wall full of post-it notes, right?
Right. Okay.
It's just that they don't know which one they should be focusing on. This
Right.
helps them prioritise from a business standpoint, which is the one that's actually causing customers grief in big numbers.
So not only big numbers, but how else do they prioritise? What else?
Well, dollar value.
It tells you dollar value.
Yeah, so you can take from the site what's the cart or the quote or whatever else it might be, or inferred value, and put a dollar value against the struggle people are seeing. And when you deliver a replay of a session and your developer can see this is the exact issue, it's affecting these platforms, and by the way, it's costing us this many dollars in the last hour, that's when you can get things fixed pretty quickly.
Right, I see. Okay, a couple more questions here. One question, does this track social media as well?
Yep, so to the extent where social media platforms let you track, then we have built that integration. UBX and through the Watson campaign automation lets you publish out social audiences to things like Facebook and the like. And when people are interacting with them, then move to your site, then that information is captured as well in terms of the interaction. We've also got direct integrations with things like WeChat and Line and the like as well. So there are different modes of it. The Facebook in particular likes to play its cards close to the chest and restricts what you can and you can't do. But we work actively with them, and to the extent of what they will let us do, as much as any other vendor, we absolutely can do that.
Yeah, and I did notice on that slide there's a couple of social listening applications and so forth as well.
Yeah, they're great. They're really good in bringing data in, either in a sentiment or a direct sense of how people are interacting from a social aspect. So we've got some customers who are seeing good results from those, which is hence why they're integrated out of the box.
Yeah. Now, there was a question around Salesforce CRM, but I know we touched on it before. There's a customer that uses that and just wanted to check if it works with them. With that, yes is the answer to that? Yes
is the answer. You're probably already familiar if you're using Watson Campaign Automation, our SaaS-based marketing automation solution that's got out-of-the-box Salesforce integration, but we've added in Salesforce as a UBX partner as well, just to make it more plug and play and the ability to push and publish and across multiple platforms.